Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Is Group Management Leaving Your Hybrid AD Vulnerable? We've got a great presentation prepared today to talk more about managing hybrid Active Directory groups. With us today, we have KOSoft founder Robert Bogle, who I'll be introducing momentarily. Before we get started, if everyone could take a quick moment to follow us on social media, you'll see on your screen here a QR code for each of your favorite social networks. If you take out your phone's camera and scan that little box below, it will take you directly to our social pages. Make sure to like, subscribe for the latest news, interesting articles, all that fun stuff. So let's get started. I'm McKenna. I work alongside the Microsoft experts here at KOSoft. Just a couple housekeeping items to go over before we jump into the presentation. First off, you notice your microphones are muted to make sure everyone has the optimal listening experience. But we do encourage you to ask any questions you may have. So depending on how you join today, either in browser or through the app, you'll see a question or chat section in your meeting dashboard. Feel free to drop your questions in there and we'll do our best to answer them. If we run short on time today, we'll reach out to you individually to follow up on those questions. While you're in your meeting dashboard, also make sure to check out the handout section. We've included additional resources that you can download and also share with your team. This session will be recorded and we'll email you a link in the days following. At the end of the presentation, we'll be sharing our contact information. So if you have any additional questions or are watching this on demand, please feel free to reach out. Also, at the end of the presentation, we'll be drawing one lucky winner of a $100 Amazon gift card. So make sure to stay on the line until then as we draw from the list of those present at that time. All right, now that we've got all that taken care of, let's jump in. So
Hey,
today,
thank you,
oh,
McKenna. I'm ready to go.
yeah,
Sorry, I
you're
jumped the
ready.
gun.
You're
Go ahead.
on it. Didn't even get to introduce you. Well, there we
Yeah.
go. That's our founder, Robert Bogle. Bob has tons of insight to share on Active Directory management, so I'll let him go ahead.
Let me start the wild ride we're going to have today. Cool. So one last chance before we switch this up. Those QR codes, they look like little chess boards or something weird. Go ahead and follow us on your favorite social media site to keep updated with good content that we produce weekly, monthly, including webinars, which are bi-monthly. Before I begin, I want to start off with the most simple explanation I can give on how groups work and why they're here. Microsoft groups are designed to complement user accounts. And a user account, if you don't know, is a credential that you use to log into Windows or to a Microsoft network of some sort. And it consists typically of a username or a sign-on name and a password. There may be other things like multi-factor, which we highly recommend, but that lets you complete the process known as authentication. That means verifying the identity of the user so we have the proper security context for that user when they attempt to access resources. So user accounts are used for authentication, and that basically verifies who you are. Groups, on the other hand, are a direct complement. They are used to identify lists of users that qualify or that are authorized to access digital resources or other physical resources. So in addition to things like printers and databases and applications and server services, it may also be connected to the door badges that you carry with you or that your HID cards that you use to authenticate to computer resources. And that process of taking a user, associating them or putting them into a group, and then when they approach a resource or attempt to access a resource, and the resource looks at the group, looks at the permissions the group was granted, and then by inheritance, you get those permissions on the user account. That's called authorization. And when you combine authentication, which is checking to see who you are, and authorization, do you have permissions, checking the permissions to access a resource. We call that access management. Okay, so if you didn't know that, you're probably in the wrong place. We're assuming you kind of know this, but I just wanted to level set where we are. Now, what makes this simple concept so complex? And frankly, it's because you can often end up with more groups than you have users. And then when you go hybrid, if you're a hybrid environment, meaning you have on-premise Active Directory and Azure Active Directory in the cloud, it just makes things oh so more complex. And it's probably because of the sheer scenarios we use groups to control access or to control the authorization authentication, the authentication process. Can also be used to control who can authenticate as well, but that's a different story. So the little pretty picture here on the right, the octopus I call it, shows cloud on the left and on-premise on the right. And let's start with the on-premise side. That's the far right. We have security and distribution group types inside of Active Directory on-premise. The distribution groups and security groups can also interact with integrated Microsoft Exchange, which is integrated into on-premise Active Directory. And you get distribution lists where you can send an email to a group of people. And then you have mail-enabled security groups, which again, you can email everybody. But the difference between a distribution list and a security group that's mail-enabled is that distribution lists can't be used for resource access. It's just a list of people that will receive an email. Mail-enabled security groups, you can send an email to that, and everybody in that mail-enabled security group is going to get the email, but also you can use it to access printers and applications and folders and public folders in Exchange, for example. So those were the original group types, and there are a certain set of rules. There's membership restrictions, how many people can be in it. The types of objects are users and groups and computers and inet.org person objects, and you can have other types of objects in there depending on what they are. But they're really flexible. And so if you can imagine, every application could potentially have full access to it. There may be limited access to an application. There could be denial of access to applications. Well, right there could potentially be 3 different groups that control the level of access. And you can then sort of multiply that times the number or the types of groups you have, and you can quickly see just on premise how you can get more groups than you have users. And if you now look over on the left side of the octopus, you'll see we even have those same 3 groups in the cloud in Azure Active Directory and Office 365, but now we have a new one to make matters, even more complicated. And those are called unified groups, or most people recognize them as Microsoft 365 groups. And you get one of those even when you don't want to get one of those. You create a team, for example, and you get one. You use Microsoft Planner. I think you get one for each Planner hub, I think they're called. And they are pervasive. They go everywhere. And of course, they have a different set of rules that they play by. And so that new group type is also followed with the inability to do nesting of groups. So you can't have one group that's inside of another group. That is legal on premise, but not in the cloud. There are some limits to the membership, the number of members. They do have 2 types, in some cases, static and dynamic. And again, just like on premise, there's no control over the data other than just sort of rudimentary delegation. And what I mean by the data, I mean the description, the naming, those types of things. They really don't give you great controls there to do those. No clear map of where groups are used on either premise, on premise or in the cloud. And one thing I didn't mention on the on-premise side is that you can synchronize group and group memberships to the cloud, which can cause some issues if there's no cloud equivalent user account, but there is on-premise user account. You put them in an on-premise group that's synchronized, but they don't have an account in the cloud, it'll appear as if they're non-existent in the membership. And that's only going from on-premise to cloud. That's synchronization. There's a tool called Azure AD Connect, but then you have something called group write back, which is for taking groups that you might populate in the cloud and try to making them reverse hybrid or hybrid on premise. but the authoritative resource or authoritative version of the group would be in the cloud. It's a difficult thing to manage, so most people just ignore that, and they manage everything from on-premise AD. Now, don't just take our word for these things. We worked with Gartner Group to do a survey, and in particular, the challenges that people recognized around managing their groups. And these were the top concerns. Number one on the list is maintaining the groups accurately, keeping the right people in the groups, making sure that they're allowed to be in the groups, and establishing who makes that decision. Going along with that, maintaining group memberships that are accurate, primarily one of the bigger challenges when you have people that are provisioned or deprovisioned, the cleanup, adding people to the groups and cleaning up the groups is all part of the provisioning and deprovisioning process, but it doesn't happen on the native on-premise legacy side. In the cloud, it works a little bit better, but it's still kind of a gigantic mess because you now have two environments where you have groups to manage, and they act a little bit differently. Plus, you have the complexity of a synchronization in there. Distributing the IT workload, so getting more people to use self-service for group management. Resolving issues and outages is a big issue. Figuring out why Joe has access but Kelly doesn't, even though they both belong to a bunch of groups. How do you figure that out? Hybrid management itself, you're going to have some groups that are cloud only, like the Office 365 groups or unified groups, but you still have on-premise groups. Then you have on-premise groups that are synchronized. How do you make sure you don't put the wrong people in the wrong group? And how do you give one interface to everybody for doing that sort of thing? Change monitoring is non-existent in a hybrid environment. You have to go to third party for that to figure out exactly what's going on. You can use event data on both sides, but a lot of times events are just not created, and there is no real good source for a single location that will give you reliable event data that can't be tampered with or that's missing information. It just doesn't exist yet. And there's other items there as well, but we'll continue to go on. So what we wanted to do is give you the top 6 critical controls that you need for group management to protect hybrid Active Directory. Now, you can also take these controls and just say protect Active Directory on premise or legacy Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. It's the same 6 controls that you need to understand are just non-existent in a usable form from the native tools. So what are these? Let's go through the list. Pretty simple. As you saw earlier, number one concern was accuracy. So native tools are not enough to keep groups accurate. That's a major, major issue. Native group management is always time sensitive. People want their access right away. And so there's an emphasis on getting somebody into a group. But troubleshooting that can be difficult because it's a complex process and people make mistakes. They get the wrong individual in the wrong group, and now all of a sudden you're granting access to something that you do or do not know somebody has a general need or a right to see based on their job role within the organization. The efficiency of the native tools is pretty low. And you want to try and offload not just the day-to-day use of that expensive IT admin resource. You want to move that over to people who are maybe in a better place to make the decisions on what group changes or changes to membership are appropriate. A lot of times administrators turn to scripting, but frankly, we see that that's actually worse than the problem, which is, it's very inefficient to manage groups, especially in a hybrid environment where you have two separate sets of groups, two different sets of group types, and no tool that kind of unifies the whole thing natively. If you're not using scripts because of the problems they introduce and the complexities they introduce and the security issues they introduce, then there's just too many changes to keep up with in most environments. And so that leads to administrative neglect because you get all these service tickets or requests to put people into groups. You do it as quickly as you can. Somebody else is responsible for deprovisioning users or I think the general consensus is that in Microsoft environments, people continue to get new access grants, new memberships, but rarely are they removed. So as they are promoted or demoted within the organization, their effective access just always increases, and that's not good, especially if you're in a compliance situation where people as they're demoted in particular need to have access revoked, or as they're promoted they have different levels of access they need, or when they're moved laterally even between divisions or departments. They may not have a right to actually see the previous information any longer. And so you have to be careful there. It's just not a great process for keeping all that stuff straight. One of the things that is really important is to try and figure out how you get the right level of access decisions to be made. Who is responsible for making those decisions? And that all comes down to accountability. And so you need some process to enforce accountability. And again, these are important when you're dealing with very secure environments or environments that are under compliance regulation, where you have to justify access. Like, for example, in healthcare, you have the HIPAA regulations, which effectively say you don't give people access to information they don't need access to. Don't have a justification. And again, if you never revoke access because the native tools don't help you do that sort of thing, then suddenly you may have a material finding. Hopefully, it just results in a fine and not some sort of breach, because that again is another result to ineffective group management. You end up with compliance failures and worse. Auditing changes in a hybrid environment it's a very difficult process. Very few tools will do it effectively. And the scary part is that changes will go unnoticed. So for example, if I'm an office admin and I'm just doing my thing, I'll never see somebody that is added to a group because they were added on premise by somebody else. And there isn't a good mechanism natively out of the native Microsoft tools to keep people apprised of these types of changes. There's just not a good process for doing that. Again, you can try to use event data, event logs to do this, but unfortunately they can be tampered with easily, and it's always, first target is let the hacker cover their tracks, right? And so you really need something that does a little bit different process there. But that's one of these top 6 things that you have to figure out. And the last, but probably the most important, is when all else fails and you have a group that has an inappropriate change or something has happened to the group to delete it or damage it. Actually, deletions are pretty simple to get back. It's when the group membership has changed inappropriately that it's almost impossible to figure out what it should be. And so you have to come up with a process for resilience, because the majority of outages, users can no longer access what they need to, is because the authentication process is fragile. The authorization process through groups is fragile. And if you strip a group membership accidentally, or somebody changes the wrong group, that person or group of people will be denied access because they no longer have membership in the group. And so you have to come up with a strategy to deal with resilience. So let's go through each of these one at a time and give you best practices around how you look at these 6 controls and things you should implement to make sure that you're doing all you can to gain control over hybrid group management. So number 1 is drive membership accuracy. Native tools are not enough. And so you're going to look for features or functions that you may have to pay a little extra for. And so they're either going to be third party, which most of these we provide, or you can go to Microsoft and increase your Azure subscription, paying it's a pretty heavy price actually, but you buy the Azure additional premium subscription, and you do get a lot of these functionality for the cloud side. You may not get them for the on-premise side. They really don't do hybrid management, but You will definitely get them from for just the cloud Azure AD side, and that might be good enough for you. If you need them for both sides and any kind of group, then come talk to Chaosoft, because I think we're probably the only people that really do this. So let's talk about how do you enforce or drive group membership accuracy. First of all, use group restriction rules. And group restriction rules are, think of it as a way to identify who should be allowed in a group, not who's in a group, but who should be allowed in the group. And that way, if the native tools are used inappropriately, there will be a rule in place that pulls those people out of the group, or at the very least alerts you they don't deserve membership in that group. So what's an example here? I think that's the best one. So let's say, for example, you have a server operators group, and the only people that should be in the server operators group must be from, they must be in the North America organizational unit or admin unit, and they have to have a department name of information technology or IT, right? And if you attempt to put somebody, say, from China that's in the department for janitorial services into the server operators group, it would be rejected. All right, so that's a group restriction rule. So it identifies a set of criteria that identify potential candidates for group membership even before they're put into the group. And this is especially important if you're doing a lot of manual group management, where people are ad hoc being requested, hey, please put Joe into this group. You can put membership group restriction rules in place, and then your day-to-day administrators will attempt to make a change. Maybe it's coming through a ticket, or somebody has made a phone call and requested it. They'll go to do it, and it'll prevent them and give them the rules. So it's a great tool for making sure that you don't make mistakes. Ideal for really sensitive, either security sensitive or compliance or privilege groups, to make sure you have the right people in them. Now, typically, you can also run those rules after the fact. So put the rules on a group, run them after the fact, and it'll identify people who shouldn't be in the group. Another great tool for looking at bigger manually maintained or curated groups. Next one is temporal group membership. These are time-based memberships. Now, there are two ways you can do time-based group memberships. You can either put a time limit on membership on the group. So put that person into the server's operator group for no more than 2 hours and then automatically remove them. That's great. Or on the user, you can say, well, not on the user, but in a slightly different context, you can say, put Joe in the server's operator group at 1 a.m. Central Standard Time and remove Joe from that group at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. And this limits the exposure. Both of those limit the exposure for having that person in that group and thereby getting the privileges that that group is granting. So server operators groups kind of a good example, because maybe you only want Joe to be in that group during a change window, right? So you're not allowed to make changes maybe 2 weeks before the holiday season, and then you can only make changes after the holiday. So you may have a situation where you only put Joe in the group, on January 2nd, or remove them from that group, before whatever holiday comes up, and then add them back in after. So it can be entries and exits. But again, it really is to help the administrators not have to remember or book a scheduled meeting to themselves, or an appointment to go out and clean up groups later on. You can choose the entry time, exit time, or the maximum duration within a group. The other added benefit to that is that if their account is compromised and they're not in the groups, that again is another way that you're limiting exposure. Not just that they have permissions when they shouldn't, but also then they don't have that permission normally. It's granted for a small period of time and then revoked. So drive this, and again, these are two great features that allow you, especially around manually managed groups. Now, ideally, you wouldn't manually manage any groups, right? And so the next piece is to put automation in place to automate the group membership and allow some of the time back to admins who would maybe having to audit and update group memberships on a periodic basis. So for automation, avoid scripts. I mean, you can use them. We have people use them, but honestly, the number one reason we sell our recovery tool is because of scripts. People wrote a script and made a mistake in the script, right? They're not programmers. They don't do testing. They grab a crazy script off the internet. They try to modify it for their environment, then they execute it. And again, PowerShell is accessible to anybody with administrative control. And so suddenly you're in a situation that makes it difficult to control who's running those scripts and should they be running the scripts. Other issues are around security. If you use dynamic group membership rules, you can enforce business logic and write it down, right? They're written into the rules for the dynamic membership rule. And so if somebody asks you, well, what are what's the precursor for me adding a person to the group? Well, here are the rules. They have to be in this department and they have to, be in this administrative unit, et cetera. Or maybe they have to have a group membership in another group, something like that. Automatically and dynamically updates the groups anytime the rules are executed, and you can even run those rules dynamically. Now, some systems like Chaosoft systems actually have both inclusion rules and exclusion rules, which allow you a little bit more granularity and simplicity, a little bit better UI over some of the more native groups where you might have to use LDAP and on-premise and use some PowerShell language in the cloud. But these dynamic membership rules are highly efficient, removing the human element, which we make mistakes. It also eliminates for those groups, administrative neglect, which is the biggest driver. When we say administrative neglect, it's really driven because of the volume of changes. So this is one of those ways you can avoid that. Reducing the IT overall burden, one way is definitely automation with dynamic rules, but also moving the burden of compliance and security for access decisions, group membership decisions, onto the people who understand the business logic and are responsible for the resource. These would be the application or the resource owners themselves. They can be responsible or made responsible and help out IT by managing their own group memberships. And so once you assign an owner to a group, that owner being the resource or the application owner, self-service allows them to add and remove people. It also moves the burden of security and compliance to the resource owner, doesn't completely absolve IT. IT needs to make sure that the owner is doing their job in assigning or revoking access. But it definitely means that an expensive IT resource doesn't have to be involved on the day-to-day adds or removes. Excuse me. And also, they're not trying to make business decisions that they're not qualified to make. And so the compliance auditors love this because the person who is responsible and should understand the motivations for the business to grant or revoke access or deny access is making the correct decisions, we hope. Use scripting here as a last resort. Avoid it if you can. It's just not a great alternative. Scripting became very, very, very popular with Microsoft customers, but I will tell you, I have my doubts to the seriousness that they carry forward with it. The fellow who invented their scripting language is left and is now working for another large enterprise, and that gives me some indication that I think they say the bloom is off the rose, maybe for PowerShell with Microsoft in particular. We also see them constantly getting rid of or deprecating PowerShell command packs. They say they're refining them, they're rewriting, which is true, but we just don't see the level of commitment that we did, 5 to 10 years ago without somebody internally championing Microsoft PowerShell. Next thing to reduce the IT burden, give IT admins enterprise class tools. The native tools are built for medium and small businesses. Originally, Office 365 was implemented along with Azure to combat Amazon and Google. And guess what? On the Google side, it's almost all small businesses that use the Google Work or whatever they call it today. And a couple of examples are, one of the big operations is comparing two users' group memberships to see, why is Kelly not able to access a resource, but Brian is? Well, it's through group membership. Let's compare them. So you should give them a comparison tool. There should be some way to non-destructively lock down a group to disable it. There's no such thing as disabling a group, any kind of Microsoft group. It just doesn't exist. So some way to lock it down or disable it. There are tools out there that will do that. And then finally, group cleanup tools and basically general auditing and change auditing tools are really important so that when users are deprovisioned, group memberships are cleaned up. You also need to keep that information around because you might need to audit that someday, or may have a security person coming in asking questions, and you need to know what a departed user's group membership look like at any point in time. So it's important to use these non-destructive methods for full deprovisioning or provisioning of accounts or new access. Accountability. All right, so now to move the burden of compliance and the burden of all that manual effort on application and data groups, we're going to assign self-service group management to the resource owner. Well, ownership comes with responsibility. And as I mentioned, IT doesn't just absolve itself. You need to make sure IT is overseeing. They're providing oversight to the owners. And you do that by a couple of things. First of all, whatever system you have should have request and approval capability for the group owners. So they can decide whether they publish a group to the world and let people request membership in their group. So there's some mechanism so that IT doesn't have to be involved, and tickets don't necessarily have to be opened in ServiceNow or whatever your ticketing system is. Allow those owners the ability to approve or reject, to enforce their rights to make those decisions. But also make sure that two additional things happen: that the owners periodically approve the existence of that group, right? So sometimes groups sit around, they're not needed anymore. You don't want unused groups laying around because they represent access, and if they're unused and they still have people in them and they're still granting access, good idea for a hacker, right? Go get myself into that group to go off and get access. And we see a number of enterprise-wide compromises happening because of that. And so you want to clean those up, right? So ask the owner periodically, once a year, do you still need your group? And again, if you're using a non-destructive process, if they say no accidentally and it's deprovisioned, you can always bring it back. That's the idea. Second of all, for compliance and security reasons, make sure the owner's making the appropriate decisions. Ask the owner to attest to the accuracy of the group membership. And what attesting means, it simply means they're certifying it or swearing to it, right? And so the idea is that, every quarter or twice a year, whatever schedule your compliance auditor, your security people want, you ask the owners, not only do you still need the group, but is the group accurate? Meaning are the right people in the group? And then finally, we actually in our attestation process have a little digital compliance statement that you can write up, and we have a default one, but you can put in your own text. And it says, I'm the person that controls access to this resource. The people in the group have my approval to be in the group and that are going to be able to access, and I understand what I'm granting access to. So once they have gone through that little mini workflow, they hit yes and they digitally sign that statement. So any compliance or security audit that happens, you'll have a statement from the application or data owner certifying the level of access that the people in that group have. That's a great way to prove that the burden of compliance has moved from IT, who's servicing tickets and all sorts of sensitive and non-sensitive group membership requests, move that burden over to the application owner. Now, if the owner isn't doing what they should, and it could be more than one owner, it could be a group of people, it's not necessarily just one, but if nobody's managing that group, if they're not doing the certification, they're not doing the attestation, every good attestation certification oversight process will have automatic remediation. And again, this is where being able to disable the group until somebody comes back screaming and they go do their certification. that's a good process to have in place. So look for a system that has that non-destructive group membership lockdown or disablement. Now, let's talk about out-of-band changes or unwanted changes. And this is sort of bringing us to how do you control change of a group, not just made by the owners, but potentially a rogue change that should not have happened, or what we call an unwanted change. I would look at unwanted changes to your groups or users or any objects as an insider threat. It is absolutely appropriate to consider that an insider threat, because an inappropriate change or an unwanted change could mean an outage or a security compromise or a breach. And it could actually be the precursor to somebody introducing ransomware that could take out your entire on-premise forest or compromise your Azure directory security. And we've seen both. Lincoln College was put out of business because their directory was taken offline. They got hit with a ransomware attack. A huge number of US government customers were compromised with the SolarWinds attack because the Azure Active Directory authentication and authorization process was there's a way that people were able to get around that in federated environments. And so when you look at what these insider threats represent, it could be just a simple mistake, or it could be a malicious change. And a malicious change could be by somebody who's broken into the system and is, a hacker, or it could be somebody who's upset with the company. Somebody got terminated, and so they want to seek their revenge. Ponemon Institute did a really interesting study, and we have 61% here is the number they came up with, which are threat origin of a mistake. And that's a clown, right? Somebody messing around. I don't mean your administrators are clowns, but I couldn't find a good icon for it. So we used a clown. I thought that was pretty funny. So somebody, some clown makes a mistake, right? That's the way you say those things. 61% of the time, that mistake, which could cause an outage, is just a simple, I didn't mean to do it. Other people are, playing around, they're trying things, and maybe they have inappropriate delegated access and they make a mistake. So, you need to restrict, who can manage your groups, not just the owners, but the day-to-day admins as well. And so you need something that's going to help you, control that better from a delegation standpoint. That's one mitigation way. The next is 39% are malicious changes. Almost 40% of changes are done in a malicious fashion. That's frightening as an insider threat. Over the last several years, there's been a 47% increase in insider threat incidents, and the average cost for those because you have some that are, they end up taking out the entire environment, has gone up considerably over the last several years by 30% or so. They're saying that the average cost of an outage is 11.4, almost $11.5 million. That's quite a bit of money. Now, those outages obviously are including the ones that end up taking out the entire environment. So your entire organization ceases to operate because your directory is gone. Your identity and your access is now completely broken because somebody's compromised it. So how do you know what's going on? How do you make sure this doesn't happen? Well, one of the issues is event logs and SIEM tools. This is what everybody's using, change auditing tools, right? We got to get our event data collected. Yeah, you should collect event data, but events are unreliable. It's always the first thing that people attack when they're trying to compromise an environment. And SIEM tools use events. So you're stuck taking events, the event log tools. SIEM tools are no better because they still rely on them. So you want to use what we call continuous change monitoring. That is actually direct observation of the objects in Active Directory, your groups in particular, and looking for changes that are introduced, and then going back and correlating those with any other known information like events. The cool part is if the events are compromised, you still get all the change data and you see what's being updated or modified. The cool part about continuous change monitoring, if it's done right, because it's recording all changes, it also serves as a way to store recovery data or rollback data. And so if you're going to use continuous change monitoring, and again, this is not event-based change auditing, this is change monitoring, it should have integrated rollback. And so make sure that is a part of whatever change monitoring solution you're looking at. Prepare for compliance audits or security audits. You're going to look for change monitoring that shows before values and after values, and one that can, especially like with compliance audits, report on point in time memberships for groups. So who had access at this moment in time. If you're using dynamic rules, dynamic membership rules, who established the rules, who wrote the rules, who last modified the rules. You need to have all that so you have a chain of custody to make sure you fully understand what's going on. And then finally, if there is an inappropriate change, you need to be able to roll that back. And so you need to install the process to guarantee resilience of your groups so they don't cause outages. And we have a good example. So I would look for a solution that provides instant recovery. Chaosoft does have that, by the way. So if you find an anomalous group change, you can instantly roll that back. There's no waiting, no messing around. And you also want to make sure that as you're thinking about this, realize that this happens every day in every Microsoft environment. This is not something that may happen in the future. So you should really adopt the attitude of, I need a solution to recover when it happens, not if someday it might happen. So take that mentality. Realize that, I hear this every day, and it's sad because it's always, when they come to us, oh, we thought the recycle bin would fix that, right? So Microsoft has recycle bin. The only thing that is undo delete. So it's not, I accidentally, removed all the users from a group, or worse, I removed some users, I don't know who, and it's not my event data, or it is across 1,000 events, right? Because I wrote a script the wrong way and whatever. Relying on the recycle bin is a recipe for failure. So don't do that either on premise or cloud. And you're going to have to implement a Active Directory data recovery solution like Chaosoft. There are 2 others that I know of on the market, maybe 3. I think we're the only ones that are true hybrid. But there are other ones out there. There's some other tools out there that'll help you bring back directory data. But plan for hybrid. If you're hybrid, or plan for cloud only. You shouldn't have to go buy another tool or a 3rd or 4th tool to do all these things. It should be one solution that you get. And with hybrid, some of the extra little issues can be, the change, I discover it because somebody in office starts complaining they don't have access. If I troubleshoot it there, I might not find it because I may not see anyone removed from a group because it might have been done with Azure AD Connect, the synchronization tool. So if it was a synchronization issue, the recovery or rollback should happen on premise first, even though I've discovered the issue in the cloud. And so the solution has to be smart enough to know what all the steps are to reverse a particular change, whether it's on premise or cloud, no matter where you found it, on premise or cloud. And then finally, it may also be required that you initiate Azure AD Connect. Now, let me give you an example of one of our customers and what happened to them. They were in the healthcare industry. There was a script that was executed and a group was updated. It happened to be their Office 365 licensing group that had been manually managed or dynamically managed. I can't remember which. I think it was manually managed because they couldn't produce a set of rules that would correctly classify all the users. And when that script was executed, 4,400 professionals were removed. And when that happened, their licenses were revoked and they lost Teams, they lost their email. Some of them, I think, had Teams voice, so they couldn't call. We just happened to be in a proof of concept with them with that particular opportunity. They called our engineer on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. We hopped on a WebEx and quickly found the group based on the first user that called and complained, and clicked rollback and it rolled back the membership and resolved the issue within a couple of minutes. In addition to that, there is some metadata that's lost when those licenses were revoked, and our solution puts that back as well. So moving forward, they automated the memberships with Chaosoft administrators so that they didn't have those issues moving forward. So those are the top 6 items. Now I know you're all interested in getting that Amazon gift card, so I don't want to belabor the point. Now, as a companion to this webinar, we also have a live demo of Chaosoft that we're going to be doing shortly. It's in a week and a half's time. It's going to show you how to secure and streamline hybrid AD management around groups. That'll also show you, the things that we've discussed today, including not only all those different types of rules, but also the recovery of a group membership should somebody either maliciously or mistakenly strip your group memberships. If you want to register for that, you will receive an email, but you can go to chaosoft.com/events. You'll see that event in the upcoming event series, and off you go. Now with that, I'm going to turn it back over to McKenna. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I really appreciate it. And from me, have a great day. McKenna, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. All right, so that concludes our presentation for today. We'd like to thank everyone again for their time and hope you enjoyed the webinar. At this time, we'll go ahead and take attendance for that gift card drawing, and we'll email the winner directly for more information. You'll also see here on the screen a few quick links for the Chaosoft website. Should you have any additional questions, you can visit chaosoft.com/question. If you'd like to schedule a personalized demo or get our free trial, you'll see those links here as well. We also have a QR code on the screen. Again, if you scan with your phone camera, it will take you directly to that demo request page. And of course, for more information about Chaosoft and our solutions, feel free to visit chaosoft.com. Again, thank you so much and have a great day.